So the formal part goes, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, everybody. Beautiful good afternoon to you from Jones Valley in central Alabama. My name is André Natta. I currently serve as the president of the board of directors for the Tiny News Collective. We have news coming up soon. That's all I'm really going to say about that. I think we have an announcement coming up in the first week of June. And I think that's about what I think the board would let me get away with for that. It might involve our first cohort. But in the meantime, we are going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, and it is the Southeastern United States, in particular, the state of collaboration in North Carolina. My bully pulpit has long been about the fact of everything that has been going on in the Southeastern United States, and the fact that a lens needs to be shined on it more and more often, and the conversations need to be amplified more and more and more, because it is not that these things are not happening, it is that more people need to be aware that they are happening on a continuous basis. I believe that there is a slide that we'd like to show here at the very beginning.
I believe Chris is going to be sharing his screen. Yep, there you are.
I believe Chris is going to be sharing the screen. Oh, see, I could even get a joke in for Chris. Chris Rudisill from Charlotte, North Carolina. Would you please unmute yourself?
Okay, sorry about that. Let's go with. All right. Can you see that?
Yep,
okay.
Looking good.
Yes, we can. Yes.
André, do you want me to cover this section?
Yes.
Perfect.
I was all set to, but since you're ready, I figured go ahead.
Because I think you got to hit present one more time. I got to hit present there. We're still getting the out view here.
Let's do this. All right, how's that?
Nope, same thing, but let's just go with it.
Oh, okay. So it's just 2 slides. So we'll go through this quick so we can get to the panel. But we wanted to first start with kind of a baseline of what collaborations look like in the state. And hold on one second. Sorry. Messing up again.
I think if we keep going, we can make the record of 4 reshares in one panel. I think so.
Let's do
There
it.
we go.
Let's do
I
it.
think we go for it. I say we just keep going.
I say we own it at this point. So
all right. So there we go. There we go. All right. So we wanted to start off with just a baseline. So the current examples of newsroom collaborations in North Carolina include the North Carolina News Collaborative, where there's 22 news organizations across the state, the North Carolina Public Radio Association with 16, North Carolina Watchdog, which you've heard about through several sessions, Watchdog Reporting Network with 7, the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative, which I'm here to represent, with 6 newsrooms, along with 3 organizations from the community, North Carolina Media Equity Project of the North Carolina Local News Workshop, which Melanie just mentioned, and the North Carolina Investigative Journalism Collaborative of Carolina Public Press. And these are just a small segment of what collaborations look like in the state. Dozens of individual and cross newsroom collaboratives and projects and partnerships are happening daily. And with that, I'll turn it back over to André, and we'll be discussing some of those partnerships and what they look like.
thank you very much. I am going to, in part because a note that I thought would come in did not, I'm going to cheat and use the schedule. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and have each of the panelists talk for about 4 to 5 minutes. During that time, I would like all of you to go ahead and submit questions into the Q&A section, because I want this to be as engaging as possible. And it only makes, I got 2 questions, mainly because I think when you hear from these folks about the general overviews of how they have approached collaborations because some of them are involved in several, as you'll hear. And then we can dive into a couple of them in particular. I think you're going to have some deeper questions that I could probably come up with, and I want as many thought-provoking threads of consciousness to continue to move forward. So with that, because I am using the list on the agenda and not the one I was going to use, Judan, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I'm Judan Marshall. I'm the Chief Content Officer at WFAE. We're the NPR station here in Charlotte. So I just looked at our collaborations over the last year. And over the last year, we've had 17 collaborations, 10 of which are long-term and ongoing. So these collaborations have allowed us to expand our coverage of the Latino community, of the Black community, of small businesses, of transportation, voting in elections, climate change, COVID-19, racism and healthcare, and more. They were really important to tackling voter information and voter disinformation before the elections. They also allowed us to give people critical information during the pandemic. So we were able to answer people's questions about everything from unemployment benefits, jobs info, and other resources available to help them through the pandemic. They've also allowed us to increase our community engagement and community training efforts. So for example, we have 2 reporters embedded in the library through a collaboration with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library here. And that's helped us better connect with people throughout our community and respond to their news and information needs. We also worked with the library over this time to continue our storytelling and podcast training. So while we wanted to do and started those efforts in person, we moved them all to virtual. And we also did an 8-week boot camp training people how to tell their own stories. What was important in that collaboration is that we narrowly targeted to individual branches to ensure diverse participation. Because when we open something up to the entire community, oftentimes communities of color get drowned out in terms of registrations. So we were very targeted in that approach. And through a collaboration with several other entities, we put together the first Charlotte Podcast Festival, which was a month-long conference drawing nearly 14,000 registrations from around the world. And then Melanie mentioned it, but we're part of the North Carolina Media Equity Workshop. And that's helping us and other newsrooms improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations, in our journalism, and in our recruiting. So some of our partners over the last year that we've worked with, some of the other ones are publications serving communities of color, some newsrooms that are focused on single topics. One international newsroom has been part of our collaborations. We partner with a couple of national newsrooms, and then other public media newsrooms we work with on a regular basis. We have weekly calls and coordination with them. We work with universities, and our collaborative, which Chris will talk more about, represents TV, newspapers, Pure Play Digital, and other organizations. So here are some of the things that we consider before deciding to collaborate. Number one is, does this allow us to better serve our community? After we determine that, are we co-authoring the collaborative effort, or is it just a plug and play? It's very rare that we participate in plug and plays. We want collaborations to be equitable. And just like we want to participate in equitable collaborations, we also want to make sure that our partners feel that way. So when we start a collaboration, we solicit input, we set expectations together, and then we hold those regular check-ins to ensure that we stay aligned and that we can tackle obstacles quickly. So how do we manage all of these collaborations? First and foremost, the previous panel and others have talked about it, but finding the right funding to support some of the work that we want to do. In many cases, we've been able to obtain grants to support the work and to add resources for both us and our partners. For example, we have 2 reporters that we hired through a grant to write stories for us and several other partners. And tomorrow we'll talk more about the collaboration that we have with La Noticia here, in which we share a reporter to cover the Latino community. Second, we look at who's going to lead the work from each newsroom. It's really important to have the right leaders in place. Not everyone has the right skills, outlook, or approach to help lead collaborations. So it's important to screen for that up front. But then once you identify that you're running into leadership issues, to pivot quickly and unapologetically to ensure that your collaborations remain successful. And then distributing the work. You know, I initiate a lot of collaborations, but I can't manage them all. And so I'm fortunate to have several journalists in my newsroom who can lead collaborations. And what I look for is making sure that the people leading our collaborations understand how our newsroom can contribute to the partnership, as well as the value and expertise that our partners bring. We have a no surprises policy, so honest feedback is necessary and any challenges have to be addressed immediately. In any newsroom partnership or initiative that I'm involved in, I stress no suffering in silence, because we can't fix what we do not expose. We also approach our collaborations as an opportunity to share with and learn from our partners, right? So it's an equal exchange of value. We know we have as much to learn as we have to give, and that's the way we try to approach these. And then I'll end with this. Each person in our collaboration must embody two things. One is a spirit of generosity, and two is the ability to push past ego. And I cannot stress both of those enough. You know, I can go on about the need to be organized, to communicate early and often, and to be clear about goals going into the collaboration, but those two traits are really the foundation for successful and equitable collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judan. I want to make sure that we get your full title in, because I think we neglected that in the jumps. Judan is the Chief Content Officer and the Executive Vice President for NPR member station WFAE. Next up, I am shifting the schedule, the lineup a bit, and I want Lovey Cooper from Scalawag magazine to go next. Lovey, you're up.
Hey y'all, I'm Lovey. I'm the managing editor at Scalawag. Scalawag is a nonprofit journalism and storytelling organization focused on the South. And we work in solidarity with oppressed communities to disrupt and shift dominant narratives about the South as a whole. So I think that that's something that is a little bit different about us in comparison to some of these other North Carolina specific and North Carolina centric publications. And I think in addition to that, something that makes us a little bit different is that all of our work is grounded in that solidarity lens through what we refer to and other folks refer to as movement journalism. Shout out to Lewis Wallace on the chat there, shouting me out. Read his book to learn more. But yeah, so most of our traditional reporting projects are based on the idea of producing news that's grounded in, you know, the experiences of oppressed people. And that basically for partnerships means thinking more on a story by story or series basis as far as how we approach different topics, because the needs that we might have in a partner shift depending on the needs of what the story is telling. So our approach to partnerships is really intentional. And when we're thinking about journalism as a way to share information that's informing folks on the ground, we kind of willfully absolve ourselves of the greater kind of agenda setting burden that can keep journalists in competition with each other. So I think it really, you know, creates an atmosphere that is more open to, you know, a back and forth when it comes to co-editing, co-producing, co-sharing, things like that. So our editorial vision is driven by those communities that we aim to serve. And, you know, we are not breaking news. We don't need to be the first people to share a story, but we want to be the best at providing the context and the next steps and the actionable information around a story. And yeah, collaboration has been really key to kind of growing in that, despite being often under-resourced, right? You know, we cover more than North Carolina, but we know that we as editors and our contributors can't be everywhere in the South at once and aren't capable of holding all of those connections themselves. And, you know, the South deserves a thriving media ecosystem, to go back to what is an ecosystem, right? We want other news organizations to flourish with us in that. And we want everyone involved in a story, whether they're an editor, producer, a source, you know, the author themselves, we want them to feel like, you know, working with Scalawag and working on that specific story has an impact on, you know, their work and on that issue. So a good example of something that kind of falls in line with all of this is our ongoing Power Lines partnership with Southerly that was funded through the Buell Center at Columbia University that well, for one, provided us funding to go after these stories that might not otherwise be told, but it allowed us the space to publish in-depth stories specifically about climate change and infrastructure in the South. That partnership produced some incredible stories that we just wouldn't have had the resources or the capacity or the author pay, the funding, right, to go after individually. And I think that the climate change angle is a good example of one of those topics that benefits from having, combined knowledge, combined resources, combined connections, things that these are stories that are far reaching, that, there might be something, if we're making a statement about the region or the state as a whole, something that we need outside input on in order to make sure that we're getting it comprehensive and fully correct and most impactful that it can be. So, the stories that we put out, we make sure that they serve both of our audiences, right? We're not just thinking about, okay, is this a Scalawag story? Who are we serving here? But how is this going to be the most useful to the most people? And from that, we've seen that kind of targeted approach to our specific audience plus their specific audience means that collaborations like this overperform online. They stand out from the rest of our content. The things that circulate the most year over year are these stories that have another newsroom in them, and that we are both publishing the exact same thing. Mentally, that math sounds like it shouldn't work out, right? If the exact same thing is out there twice. But yeah, so the Powerline series has been renewed for this year. We're going to be producing an enterprise series as well as other collaborative fun engagement things with Southerly this year. So stay tuned for all of that. And I think that that's 5 minutes, so I will hold the rest of my thoughts until later.
Thank you, Lovey. And thank you for keeping track of the 5 minutes. You're right there with me. It's pretty good. Yeah. Next up, Sherry Chisenhall. Would you please unmute yourself?
Thanks, André. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. The Observer, I'm the editor of the Charlotte Observer, and we have a lot of, we're doing better at sort of these one-off partnerships of, here's a specific series that we're going to work with a specific partner to publish 6 stories on X, or with 2 partners. Really our core is that we're part of 4 collaboratives. For what I would call longer term, and longer term today to me is like a year to 2 years. 3 of those are heavily focused on content and journalism, and one that you've heard mentioned multiple times is focused on diversity and inclusion in North Carolina newsrooms, which obviously long term does, or midterm even does, impact content, but it's not the focus right up front of that collaborative. All of the things we do, the reason we have all these different efforts is because they each, and I think Jadon talked about this, they each have different missions to some degree, or the membership is different. Some have a different geographic focus. They each are seeking to solve a different problem. Each of them has its successes and challenges that can be slightly different in some ways. Like other collaboratives, some of ours were developed to address issues in the pandemic, or pivoted during the pandemic when, the issues that we were covering rose to the forefront. And so just to talk about a few of those, you've heard people reference the NC Watchdog Reporting Network. Angie Newsome's group, Carolina Public Press, who's here on the panel, they're part of that. It's really the smallest of our groups at 7 newsrooms. Initially came together because in the early days of the pandemic, reporters in different media organizations were finding that there was no accurate COVID testing data. And what there was, the state was saying it was up to local counties to give that out, and they weren't giving it. So there was just this absence and this silence around testing data at a time when it was desperately needed. So the group came together as really banding together to do accountability work and push, threaten legal action in some cases to get COVID testing data that was needed. And if you remember at that time on a national level, you were hearing these messages like anybody who wants a COVID test can get it. And all of us at a local level knew that that wasn't true. And since then, that network has expanded its range of accountability reporting, some COVID related issues, some not, but it's very heavily reporter driven. and group editing of documents and things. We're obviously also part of the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative, and I know Chris will talk about that. It's the only collaborative that we're heavily involved in over a longer term that is really about a geographic area specific to our market and not regional or statewide. Like the Watchdog network, it's kind of evolved and focused through the pandemic as needs and issues in the community changed. One of the things about it being so local is that everybody in this collaborative was somebody who at one time we would have seen as a competitor. And that thinking was far more tested for us at a local level, I think, than it was on even a statewide level of really getting to a place of seeing people as partners. For example, like La Noticia is someone who, while they're part of the collaborative also, we sort of have a separate thing on the side where, because we've gotten to know each other in this partnership, Hilda Gurdian will say, I've got a great story. We've translated it. Do you want it? And, we'll say, here's a good story we did. She'll say, can I translate that and have that and publish it? Of sharing of content kind of in a separate cul-de-sac off that collaborative. We're also part of the North Carolina News Collaborative that Chris mentioned up front. It's our largest group with 22 news organizations across the state. McClatchy, Gannett, and Lee newspapers in the state are part of it. We organized in 2019, and at that time it was Gatehouse and BH Media were also part of that. We have several different prongs. One is the sharing of stories of, the Observer doesn't go into Asheville and cover Asheville anymore, but if they have a story that might have some impact in Charlotte, we now have the ability to share those stories. But we also do some original project reporting. And, in 2019, we published this 7-part series reported out of multiple newsrooms on the urban-rural divide and its impact in North Carolina. And then last year, we published a 6-part series on economic recovery from the pandemic. One of the things that I think has been an uplift for us is examples like that economic recovery package where the Pulitzer Center funded a project editor for us. So no one newsroom was trying to give up an editor at a time when it was hard to do that. We had someone come in who was not of a newsroom and organize like each of those 6 different newsrooms produce stories for that series. So it was a great model, Pulitzer Center funding, that really made that happen for us. And then, a little bit slightly different, you've heard a couple references to the NC Media Equity Project, which is not necessarily a content collaborative. It's this project of the NC Local News Workshop at Elon University, really a pilot project to advance diversity and inclusion in North Carolina media and newsrooms. And we're among the 6 partners there. If I look at a common thread through everything that we've done, it's been seeking to strengthen accountability reporting and finding places where we believe if we work together with 2, 3, 4, 5, 22 newsrooms, that we can deliver journalism that none of us could individually deliver. So, increasingly the question that comes up from this is, how many collaboratives can our team handle really effectively without being spread so thin that we're not a good partner? And I think that's just an open question that we all try to figure out. And, especially in a year where everybody's been so stretched and stressed through the pandemic, through covering in a meaningful way racial reckoning coverage, but to really sort out those questions of how do we make sure we're giving back as much to this as we're getting. Thanks, André.
Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate that. And we have a couple of questions that we're going to circle back and ask, in part because of some comments that you made here. Next up, I would like to have Angie Newsome from Carolina Public Press unmute.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with a lot of my colleagues here in North Carolina, and certainly to talk about some of the collaborations that we do at Carolina Public Press. I'm the founder and executive director of Carolina Public Press. We are a nonprofit news organization that's 10 years old this year, that focuses on in-depth and investigative public interest reporting, now covering all of North Carolina. And 10 years ago, when we started CPP, collaboration and community engagement and community partnerships was kind of baked into how we do our work. Ultimately, our role we see in North Carolina is to go and add investigative and public interest news to organizations and with organizations and to communities that perhaps are not receiving it freely right now. So we knew that we couldn't do that by ourselves. And so we've done lots of collaborations throughout the years. They typically fall in about 3 different pots. One is actually journalism, like collaborating on big journalism projects that touch every county in North Carolina. It's 100 counties. The second is lawsuits. We collaborate with a lot of news organizations and pushing for public records and open government, often through going to court. And so the cost share on that is, and we collaborate for that and then share kind of the results of what we're able to get or not, unfortunately, in some cases. And then third is trying to be a resource to organizations that may need us in a crisis. And so that brings me to Coven. So when COVID happened in March, our mission, like Lovey's, is not necessarily to cover breaking news. That's not what we were aimed to do. However, we knew that our team couldn't stand by the wayside when COVID came. I mean, it was pretty easy to see that there was going to be people and places in the state that were going to have a hard time accessing information, knowing where to get tested, knowing where to get vaccinations, et cetera. So we created what we call the emergency news team. And at that time, the focus was to really be a service to rural newsrooms. And so we spent time on the phone calling every rural community paper in the state and saying, hey, if something happens, because we didn't know at that time if somebody was going to get sick and what was going to happen to the newsroom, like just to say, we're here and we're available. If you need us to pick up a story for you, we're here to do that. And we were able to do that in a couple of newsrooms. But fortunately, there wasn't a huge need for that in the long term. People were really resilient, and our fears about COVID were unrealized. However, the other part is that we did reach out to Spanish language news organizations, especially in the western part of the state, and ask and partner with them about getting news to that community. And we launched a broadcast arm, mainly radio, and produced news that they could distribute through their broadcast networks and that we could distribute through ours. And we were able to get a lot of that reporting out through AM stations and networks throughout rural North Carolina. So that was really great. But then comes, what our big mission is the investigative reporting. And Sherry mentioned and talked about the North Carolina Watchdog Reporting Network, which is still going on and is something that we're proud to be a part of. There's 7 newsrooms that are a part of that, and they include TV, a public radio station, newspapers like the Charlotte Observer, and us. And the focus is really mission driven, very mission aligned with us. And that's how we gauge most, if not all, of our collaborations. Is, does it meet our core mission? And in this case, absolutely, because it's investigative. And we have gone to court with that collaboration, in addition to producing 50 stories together to get information from the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Public Safety about the treatment of prisoners, what's happening in jails in the state. And most critically, and what I'm most proud of, honestly, that was successful, was pressing a legal case to get the outbreak numbers at nursing homes in North Carolina, which they were refusing to provide. So we did go to court, or mediation actually, to get that. And I'm really proud that without that reporting network, that information may not have been released in North Carolina. So it's very impactful, and I'm really glad that we're still a part of that and continuing to do that. Our team is very small, so when we do engage in collaborations, we think about what we can add and what what further information that we could receive that could get us further down the line. And it has to be mission aligned with us, almost 100%. And almost always that's investigative. So that's just a snapshot of what we've been able to do. Right now we're involved in 3 collaborative lawsuits to try to get public information, including the release of body cam footage in the Elizabeth City shooting, which has not so far been successful, but we're not giving up on that. But that's just one example. And the case that I'm talking about with the North Carolina Watchdog Reporting Network is still in mediation. So we'll see what happens with that as well. So thanks for having us. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk just a minute about the work that we're doing.
Thank you. And we're looking forward to digging back in that a little later on. Making sure we keep mindful of time. Chris, you're up.
Thank you, Andre. Hi, everyone. I am Chris Rudisill, he, him pronouns, and I'm the director of the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative. We officially formed and or launched in 2019 as a project of Solutions Journalism Network, part of the local media project at SJN, supported in part by Knight Foundation and modeled on SJN's method of investigating and reporting news, with a primary focus on solutions to community problems. You've heard from some of our partners already, but the partnership includes 6 major media companies in Charlotte: the Charlotte Observer, WFAE, WCNC-TV, La Noticia, Q Notes, and Q City Metro, along with 3 local institutions, the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, Knight School of Communication at Queen's University, and Free Press. Our core purpose, as we've defined in our recent strategic plan, is finding solutions and forming communities together. That includes multimedia and cross newsroom projects, previous in-person, and hopefully future in-person, but now virtual community engagement activities that have included town halls, panel discussions, workshops, watch parties. In our first year, the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative focused on affordable housing, which we continue to do through a solutions journalism lens and a project called I Can't Afford to Live Here. That continues today, as I mentioned, and as many of you know, like many cities, Charlotte is rapidly growing, where citizens face increasing difficulty finding affordable places to live close to work, schools, and community centers. So our work has really focused on helping center conversations around that stress, especially for those with the fewest resources that have, increased problems of displacement. While not moving away from the issue, the collaborative pivoted to focus on the immediate needs of residents during COVID-19. That included news coverage of vital health information, local stories on the impact of the pandemic, and also the community's resilience, virtual community engagement events and town halls. And the project we've been extremely excited about this year, our graphic novel that partnered local artists with local journalists to bring together the arts community and reporters and reach new audiences with information that's vital. Sherry mentioned some of the individual projects and partnerships that have formed from our collaborative as well. We've heard it over and over, but collaboration definitely involves a renewed push for financial support as well for local news from foundations and the business community and donors. And as we've learned, we have the ability to not only show broader impact through our work, but it also involves collaborative reporting and that individual newsroom sustainability that's just built from that mentorship and partnership, which I think is really important, a really important aspect of what we do. All of this helps create a thriving local news ecosystem that's poised to tell the whole story and to really convene community and decision makers and create healthier communities. We've just gone through this strategic plan, as I mentioned, and our future incorporates more opportunities to work together to amplify this important stuff. And from our perspective, we've seen really the awesome things that can happen when we let our guards down a bit, take chances, work together, and have the courage to do so. All of that comes from collaboration. And I think I'm going over my 5, so I will shut up and pass it on to the next.
And I appreciate that because I want to make sure that I let everybody know that we are going to get to as many of these questions as possible and that some of them actually are related. So I'm going to ask them as such. And I've also given Nate, the person who has to do TV, the fortunate thing of having to be tight and do it in about 3 to 4 minutes. So
all good. I just had a 5-minute story last night, so I'm willing to give back some time today for sure. I'm Nate Morabito. I'm an investigative reporter with WCNC Charlotte, NBC affiliate here in Charlotte. We've been a member of the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative for now 2 years, a collaborative that I think is kind of moving into its kind of toddler phase now, which comes with its challenges and its benefits. For me, early on, it's been really helpful to have a super hyper focus. I know I talk to Chris about this all the time. What is our focus? I'm a content producer. I need to focus all the time. And so in that regard, it's been really beneficial. Solutions and housing early on, at least in the first year and on the back end of this pandemic. And when you think about solutions and housing, those are not issues that are generally competitive anyways. So that's partly why I like it too. There is no real, I don't think, push and pull because we're not going to have our, announcer say an exclusive investigation uncovering what's working in other cities, tonight at 11. We may say that, but we're not going to say it with the idea that somebody else is going to beat us on that because it changes kind of the tone of the conversation. So I really like that. What I think I've struggled with over the last year is they're not really distractions. They're all important stories, obviously, but I think the quick evolution of what was the pandemic and the social justice movement made us kind of continuously spin our heads around and figuring out what are we going to put our energy behind. And I think that over time, we did some really great reporting. It was just hard to keep up with it. And once we hit our focus, I thought we did a great graphic novel project on contact tracing, on what was working, on what may have worked elsewhere. It's also kind of hard to, when you have kind of a once in a lifetime pandemic, see what's working elsewhere. You kind of have to see where the pandemic has been to kind of see what's been working there. And we tried to evolve in that way as well. We also did these kind of listening sessions, which to me they're part of journalism too, just because we didn't report what people told us. We actually were listening to people in our community, which I think we need to do more of. So that to me are kind of some of the challenges and benefits. And I think as we move forward, I would like to see us reach out. We're based in Charlotte, but kind of hit those news deserts as well that need coverage. I think it's important for collaboratives to give coverage to the stories that don't get that much coverage, because that's kind of, we can use our voice to kind of push those stories. So those are just some of the ideas that I have. And I think we've done some great work and we're back on the housing beat now, but we're obviously nimble enough to kind of evolve with the world that we're living in.
thank you. And tight, man, I miss TV and radio. So getting into the questions almost immediately and trying to merge 2 or 3 of them together. And I hope I don't butcher them. And if I do, please reach out to me in a message and I'll come back and ask a secondary one. Legacy media is fiercely defensive over competition, and don't necessarily want to share insights, user data, contacts, things like that. And the fact that how well did you all know it? Well, it's actually a 2-part thing. One, how did some publishers change their mind in order to go ahead and get involved, or leadership? And then second, related to that is how have the last 2-3 years, or in particular the last year, changed the way that this all works? Because how well did y'all know each other? How has this made it easier to work together? And I'm going to toss it to Sherry because of a note that I put in the Q&A section. And I'm going to go to her first. And then anybody else who wants to go, please let me know.
What? Who's defensive? What do you mean by that? Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I think this was a huge pivot for a lot of legacy media organizations, not just legacy print, but I think some legacy broadcast also. And I'll just be honest, it was a real growth and learning process for me, and to kind of look back in embarrassment at saying I clung to these things that should not have been clung to. One of the things the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative talked about in our in our mission building was, what is it we all want to accomplish together? And I think when you come to the place of saying, wow, we all want to serve the community together, And, we thought that this was proprietary to us, but, to understand if we rise above that, I know that these 6 groups together with our 3 other partners can do more than I can do myself. Admitting that and letting go of things that you just held as like, this has to be only ours and only ours. And then later realizing that's kind of like like a kid holding on to their blanket and not sharing it with somebody else, of just getting over yourself a little bit.
I'd like to piggyback on that because so Sherry and I had a conversation early on when I returned to North Carolina about partnering together. And I think, Sherry, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but I think what we had was a very honest conversation about some of the barriers to collaborating, right? Because of the histories of our organizations, baggage that had nothing to do with us, right? And so, and over the course, and, so that was 2017. And over the course of the last several years, we found creative ways to overcome those barriers and to put, like the past aside in terms of the competitive mindset of legacy newsrooms in a lot of ways. And so we've had a lot of growth, but that came through very honest and transparent conversations about where are we starting and where do we hope to go with this?
And I'll jump in. Being the project manager, we've had, I've been able to see this happen with the reporters as well, which I think really serves as kind of like an energy behind the work of the CJC, especially during the pandemic, where Nate can share instances where him, Lauren Lindstrom from The Observer and David Borix from WFAE did interviews together. They were able to, we were able to make a stronger connection with DHHS for information around contact tracing than we probably could have done as individual newsrooms, especially some of the smaller newsrooms in our partnership. So I think, the reporters definitely bring an energy to making that partnership work.
And before you, I want Nate to jump in, and I want him to go ahead and piggyback off what you just said, but I also want to talk about how did you convince the higher ups to participate and take part in all these collaboratives? And Nate's frozen.
Oh, no, I'm here, but they presented it to me at that point. They were already committed at our TV station. They wanted to be part of this. So it was easy, for me, it seemed like a no brainer. That might be more of a question for our news editors here, manager.
How easy was it to go ahead and, well, to kind of play off of that, how easy was it for you to go and sell that idea to your newsrooms? How easy was it to go ahead and sell the concept of we're going to take part in this collaboration? Having managed the collaborative and having been the deputy manager of a collaborative back in the day, I know that it can be easier said than done. So how were you able to go ahead and sell that?
I think that's an important twist on that conversation, because in our organization, I don't think it was the leadership as much that needed convincing. There were peers across the organization, whether they were in the business side of the organization and thinking, well, if you partner with that institution that we usually get sponsorship from, maybe they won't sponsor, or, people on staff who, again, like legacy mindset of, well, we haven't played so nicely before in the past with those folks, so why are we collaborating now? And so, it took conversations and work and just a commitment that we're going to do this. And throughout my career, I found that just start where you are, right? Just do something, prove it can be done, and then replicate it, and people will come along. And that's been our experience.
And I'll just say this too, like, how many times in our profession have we been wrong? Like we thought we were doing the right thing in our institutions and we were wrong. And if we've learned anything over the last year, it's that people want us to just listen to them. And so, like, for me, I often think, why is every journalist in Charlotte going to a press conference right now? That seems like a waste of resources. What if while the public figures talking, we do kind of like a pool in the courtroom, right? Whereas everyone else is fact checking at their computer where they have access, if they're actually telling you the truth, because it's low hanging fruit and really we can have a bigger impact when we're all together. But I kind of feel like it does take a large group of partners to get the movement, right? Like in CJC, we have quite a few people, but if it was just, I don't know, a couple of us, it might be more difficult.
I'll second that Jadon's point, a couple of them. One is don't underestimate the baggage in your organization and in your newsroom. I mean, I've had people come back and say, but yeah, like this person from over there tweeted this. And I said, well, when was that? Well, it was like 5, 6, 7 years ago. And so it's just getting all of those things out there, but it's absolutely true. I had nobody I had to get upward approve this, but it was really how to explain to the newsroom, yes, you may still want to break news and beat competitors, but over here, this is what we need to do together. And to really find your way, as there's no easy answer, there's no playbook of each situation, we have to talk about it. And it took more work, and it still does, of trying to explain our partnerships and relationships within the newsroom than it did up the corporate hierarchy, which is never an issue.
I think I'll just circle back really quickly to the first thing I said, right, which is how does this help us better serve our community? And we use that to ground our newsroom in the work, right? So if we're approaching these things because it's going to make us better in service to the community, then that becomes a no-brainer. It's hard to argue with how does this fit the mission, right? And service to the community is exactly where we laser focus on everything. And that often answers the naysayers.
Anybody else want to chime in on this one? Because it's a pretty good question. All right. I would like to kind of go sideways a bit and ask, because some of you have already answered the question to a degree. How has this shifted? How has your approach to collaboration shifted as you have been in the collaboratives? How has it changed the way that you do work? How do you go ahead and how were there things that were added? Were there things that were taken away? And did figuring out and starting to listen more to the community help in this process? Angie?
Yeah, I think over time with our collaborations, first of all, we don't say yes to every collaboration because we recognize that some of them, well, to be quite honest, we don't have the capacity to do all of them. I mean, we are a very small team. We have a particular skill set. So we're not a good fit for every collaboration out there, nor are all the partners we want to work with good fits for us. So part of it is just recognizing that we have to say no, probably more than I really want to, because to Judon's point, I feel like, being in service to community, you feel like there's always something more to get. There's another story to write. There's another question to ask. There's another lawsuit to file, et cetera. But at some point you have to kind of focus, right? So we try to focus our reporting and our collaborations in that form. But secondarily, beyond collaborations, just in our project development at Carolina Public Press, when they are not, they're not conceived to be collaborations, at a certain point, we are talking on our team about, well, who could we talk to about this? Who might in the state of North Carolina or in the nation be interested in this particular project, even at this point, like if we've already worked on it, or at the just idea point. And those are sometimes those are two different answers based on what we know about our potential partners. So I feel like that the question of collaboration is kind of an underlying thing among almost every, especially the big projects that we do at CPP.
Is there somebody? Yes, Chris?
So, for me, I'm in a little different position, as you remember, where I'm not one of the partners, but helping to hopefully guide them. But I have heard this from several of the smaller newsrooms. I mean, I think one of the biggest impacts has been grants and funding. I would say, at least 2 of our newsrooms had not applied for funding before from a grant perspective until they joined the collaborative. So just seeing what's available and what's possible has really shifted the way they think about collaborative work and how it also builds sustainability within their newsrooms as well. I think 4 of our collaborative members have received Google GNI Innovation Challenge grants or awards, and among many others. So that has been a huge shift in how they operate.
I might want to come back to that grant question, although I see Lizzie put an answer in. But Lovey, do you have anything to add to this? Because you're in a pretty unique scenario with how Scalawag functions.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry, they just started construction outside my house as this panel is happening. So if you hear any loud bangs, it's that. But yeah, I'll say that something that has shifted over the last couple of years for us as we've embraced more collaborations, and then especially as we had to move our events online, was just like thinking about using partnerships as a way to better understand our target audiences and the people that we want to engage with the work. So like last year we held a screening of an environmental justice documentary called Mossville, When Great Trees Fall. And so that was an example of a time where we were working with a media maker, right? We were working with the folks who produced this documentary, and it was traditional Q&A kind of conversation. You watch the film, you come to this event, but we were thinking, okay, so beyond that, how else can we expand on this? How can we make this not just news about the news, but into something actionable and something that's an experience? So we brought on folks from other on the ground environmental justice organizations who, are not explicitly involved in what the film was about, right? But they are adjacent to it, and they can provide a lens for anyone who just showed up because they wanted a film screening, to then take that next step and activate and do something in their community. So I think that that's something that's been on my mind a lot lately, is like thinking even outside of like the constraints of traditional news partnerships, and really honing in on Scalawag's role in like an ongoing conversation and how we can move folks from point A to point B. And yeah, working online only has been a challenge for a lot of those, since events are usually the best way to facilitate those one-to-one conversations. But I think that that's also opened up, a lot of reach that we didn't have before. We can focus on different states, different regions, bring in folks that we might not otherwise have the capacity to cover that news directly, and just have them come in and speak for themselves, and then use that as a generative source of further news that we can do. But yeah, I would say that that's how we've kind of shifted over the last couple of years.
Oh, well, and we're kind of on again, another tangent to the idea of shifting. I know it's already been answered in the notes, and John's about to answer the question as well. The role that universities play in the collaborations. Is there a role for them? And there already are some answers written, so I'm going to go to Chris first, just because it's fun to do this again after so many months.
Yes, I posted an answer in there, but Queen's University is part of our collaborative and definitely helps add to that community connection, as do our partners at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. But also it's a direct connection to journalism interns that can support our work. Research, we've currently been working on a data project that we've spoken with the university's data and research team. Other instances, UNC Charlotte, there are several research fellows there that are working in the affordable housing sphere. So it just makes sense for us to connect and find those local connections, whether they be in universities, newsrooms, or like with our graphic novel and art spaces. So I think across the board, it's worth reaching out to any connection locally.
Oh, Judon, I know you were writing an answer as well, so I don't know if you just want to write the answer or you want to answer it as well.
Sure, I can jump in. We partner with Queen's University. Right now, we are partnering with the communications program there, setting up some creative approaches to creating pipelines for us, but also looking at different ways to cover the community by working with the journalism students, in addition to taking advantage of their new service, which they just started. And then we partner with UNC Chapel Hill. We're currently building out a new collaborative reporting platform called Story Mosaic, which will allow members of our community to have direct access to journalists who can answer their questions. So universities are a great partner, that is largely grounded in my work at Montclair State University that Stephanie and Joe continue, but just using the resources of universities to help serve the local news ecosystem, I think is a really important tool that we should all use.
Great. I do want to put one other question that has been answered, but I want to make sure there's a public follow-up to this question. In addition to the research that SJN is engaged in, that Liza put into the chat. Hi, Liza. In addition to that, is there any research any of you are doing individually or collectively besides that related to measuring impact, or seeing or being research being done to show the impact that your reporting or efforts are having?
We're not doing like formal third-party research, if that's the thinking behind the question, but we are looking and trying to measure our own impact. We do collaborations to help us expand how we serve diverse communities, for example. So we're looking at who are we reaching today that we weren't reaching before this, right, as those collaborations continue. And so we're measuring, we have an impact tracker that we use to capture anecdotes, but also then to look at the real metrics.
I could jump in too, if that's all right. So we don't have like a third-party measurement of impact. We do two different things. One is sheerly like, did we get the information? Did policy change happen? We know that our seeking conviction collaboration, which I talked about a couple of years ago at this event, where 11 newsrooms participated, that directly resulted in legislative change in North Carolina. So we can, at least in my point of view, it resulted in legislative change. So in that way, we can see impact. But we also internally, we have an impact tracker as well, and we have set up criteria which we believe to be really important for our investigative stories, and we grade ourselves basically about whether we hit that impact. And I wrote about that on betternews.org. You can see that. You can see a template of what that impact tracker looks like.
Let's see. I have two questions left here that I would like to present publicly. I think the more important question, though, is one that might get to a lot of some of your answers throughout the course of most of this last hour. What makes North Carolina such a unique and fertile place for collaborations? You all have a ton of collaborations, and you all genuinely enjoy the work, or at least it seems that way. So, what makes it this way? How is it so easy to go ahead well, easy being a relative term, of course, but how is it possible for all this to go ahead and take place?
I have a very idealistic answer. I guess that would be the word. I grew up in North Carolina, and like just the idea of the Southern dinner table. I mean, we come from a place where we come together at the dinner table to solve problems. We come together at the dinner table to have conversations, and it's not a solo activity. So I don't know. Maybe that plays in. André, you're from the South too, so
well, I would say I've become a son of the South. My mother always told me that it was more about just the general sense of what it felt like to be in the South, because I'm first generation. My parents are from Trinidad. And so the idea of what it felt like to be in the South, and I would say maybe less so the kitchen table than the front porch or the back porch, which in some cases could be the same thing depending on what time of year it is. So the idea of being able to have people come together to just have those types of conversations, to go ahead and inject an answer, I think that allows the South in general allows that. And I think South Carolina, and South Carolina, because that's on my, they're all on my brain because I've been talking to folks all week about this stuff. South Carolina, I think about what happens over in historic Mitchellville. I think about family in North Carolina. I think about the tons of friends here still in Central Alabama. I think about the years in Georgia. I think about the ability to go ahead and continue these conversations. And I think they never really end. They just get told you're going to continue it later on. And that's kind of nice. You know that it's there. You also know that they're not perfect. And that there's still work to do. But I will shut up and I'll let you go to an answer.
So I don't know if I'm the only New Yorker in the bunch, but as the
Bronx boy.
Not necessarily a Southerner, although I consider Charleston home. I will say there's a reality to collaboration, which is, we can't approach journalism the way we have historically approached it, right? Like we all have limited resources. In many cases, the resources have dwindled over the years for us. And so, if we want to be effective, we have recognized that we're stronger together and, and that we can have reach and impact and cover topics that we wouldn't otherwise cover by teaming up. And so the reality of it is that we have replaced lost resources by using the collaboratives to strengthen us where we might otherwise really be vulnerable. So that's at least part of the value of collaborating for me. And I think other people will recognize that, by coming together, we're even able to attract external support that we wouldn't have been able to attract.
And I'll just say, we have a modest group here, but there are people here on this panel that help lay the groundwork for where we are today, right? I mean, if it wasn't for the Carolina Public Press, doing this all those years ago, we wouldn't be able to pick up and start our own collaborative. And I think I've heard the Observer was greatly involved years ago. Now, I think it also helps in North Carolina, our public records laws are not very good. So it's very easy to come together against something as simple as that. Like that alone wants me to work with everyone, to get access to public records.
That's extremely important. Yes, Angie.
Yeah, I was just going to say that too. And thanks, Nate, for that really kind, what you said. That's really nice. But I mean, going to the appeals court in North Carolina is not inexpensive to get public records. Those of you in other parts of the country might be surprised at what's considered not public in this state. So, or even if it is, how you have to go about and to get it. Body cam footage is an example of that, where you cannot get it without a court order in North Carolina. So just the sheer cost of some of this, especially in in court, really demands in some case collaborations.
And with that, I believe with a few seconds to spare, because I know Joe is really excited about this, unless somebody has anything else that they would like to add to this discussion, we do need to wrap up. I'd like to thank all of you for making the time this afternoon. I'd like to thank everybody out there in video land for tuning in as well. And once again, thank you, Stephanie, for this opportunity all these many times. Always fun.